Welcome, everyone. We're going to give a couple minutes as people come in. So while we're waiting on people to come in, I have a little poll to get us started. Let me get that up for you. So again, as you're coming in, welcome. Feel free to put your name and where you're joining from in the chat, and we have a fun poll to get us started. What's hiding in your freezer right now? A mystery container you might identify someday? Frozen veggies you swear you'll use soon? Ice cream, obviously. That's what I have. It's a well-organized masterpiece, so no hidden surprises. And secrets, you'll never know. So we'll just give a couple minutes, maybe like a minute and a half as people are coming in to take this poll. And then I'll share the results and we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. Maybe 30 more seconds on the poll and then we'll get started. So if you haven't answered yet and you'd like to, please go ahead. Welcome. While you're doing that, I'm going to get the CEU packet in the chat for you. You'll also receive that in an email after the webinar. Okay. So it looks like most of us have frozen veggies. We swear we'll use soon, about 40%. Ice cream and it's well organized are a little over 20%. And not very many people had mystery containers. That's good. And just a few people with some secrets. So thanks for participating. And we'll go ahead and get started. So some quick housekeeping, please feel free to join the chat. If you have questions during the webinar, put those in the Q&A box. A survey will pop up after the webinar. Please take a minute to take that to help us improve our webinars. And if you're looking for CEUs, they are available from ANFP, NCHEC, and NEHA. We'll also offer certificate of completion for other eligible organizations. You'll get that in an email. You can find it on the website and it will be in the chat today. Just a quick note on why we're here. Each year, 1 in 6 people in the US get sick from foodborne illness, leading to 128,000 hospitalizations and 3,000 deaths. So at the partnership, we're a network of 13,000 public health and food safety educators, 40 partner organizations and federal liaisons, and our goal is to work together to reduce the risk of foodborne illness by advancing trusted and science-based behavioral health messaging and resources. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Sanjay Gummalla. Let me pull up my notes here. He is the Senior Vice President of Scientific Affairs with the American Frozen Foods Institute. Welcome. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie, and welcome to the audience. Thank you for the invitation to speak with this very, very important community of educators. AFFI takes a lot of pride in partnering with the PFSC, so thank you again, Katie. In general, I believe there's a huge opportunity and responsibility to educate consumers, certainly in an evolving marketplace of products, labels, and behaviors. Clarity and understanding of any message is paramount, and I think you would all agree that it is important to achieve any improvements in public health outcomes. And I hope today I can deliver on these two elements as it relates to the role of freezing and frozen foods in the American diet. Next slide, Katie. First, let me make a few comments about my organization, the American Frozen Food Institute, which is the national trade association representing frozen food and beverage processors, and all of the supporting entities that make this a vibrant industry. While our priority remains advocacy for science-based and practical policies and industry practices, we aspire to also elevate the voice of frozen, even as we venture into new areas of innovation to meet market needs. Next slide, please. Today, Our strategic objectives revolve around setting a new benchmark of food safety excellence, push the limits of frozen's ability to be on the plate, even as we find the opportunities for this category to drive a sustainable food system. And I will attempt to cover these topics in the context of our discussion. Next slide, please. You may recognize many of the brands on this slide. I personally feel very proud to represent a spectrum of small and medium-sized companies, ranging from family-owned to multinational brands that have frankly trailed ablaze over the last few years in delivering high-quality nutrition and value to consumers. So let's get started. Next slide, please. And in getting started here, I want to tell the story of frozen foods from the lens of an educator, particularly the role of frozen foods in our shared goal to improve public health. I'll cover developments in the freezing industry over the past few decades, why the frozen category's quality and sophistication meets consumer needs, and why it's at its best ever. But more importantly, cover the food system from the perspective of food safety, nutrition, and cost. And when I say cost, it's not just affordability, but convenience and time and food waste and the ability to reduce food waste. And I hope in this process, I also dispel some of the myths about freezing and frozen storage and its impact on pathogens, as well as provide insights about how consumers can continue to assure the safety of frozen foods. Next slide, please. The concept of freezing is fairly straightforward. It simply comprises using low temperature to remove heat from the food. The speed at which food is frozen is critical to product quality, and rapid freezing processes reduce the temperature of food from the ambient state to much lower temperature states, such as -20 Fahrenheit or even -40 Fahrenheit, in just a few minutes to form what we describe as the smallest ice crystals as possible. And the smaller ice crystals, in turn, are less likely to damage the cellular structure of, say, meats or fruits and vegetables. And that results in preservation of texture and flavor, and certainly the nutritional value, much better than if those crystal sizes were much larger. Commercial operators today use a range of freezing technologies, with individual quick freezing being the most common method, commonly termed as IQF. It uses extremely cold temperatures, like I said, -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and turbulent airflow over and around the food. And IQF is really excellent at maintaining the identity of individual pieces of food, like blueberries, corn, shrimp, and preserving their texture and color. These freezing steps, are carefully managed across different food types, whether fruits or vegetables or proteins, or even a multi-component meal like an entree or side dishes. Next slide, please. The fact is, freezing is simply a change in temperature, and it just so happens to be among the most ancient methods of food preservation. As a food microbiologist and food safety professional, there are several causal reasons for this preservation effect. First, as the available water in the food freezes, it reduces the amount of that water available for microbial growth. So rest assured, the growth of pathogens is not a concern during the frozen storage period. On the other hand, the act of freezing, the IQF technology I described on the previous slide, does not inherently inactivate or kill pathogens that may have contaminated the food or ingredient prior to freezing. In fact, potential microbial contaminants persist in frozen foods through the period of storage, and while they may not grow, the presence of contaminants in a frozen food may present a problem. Next slide, please. And that brings me to AFFI's foremost priority. That is to strive towards continuous improvement and set a new benchmark for food safety excellence. Unequivocally, the pathogen that stands out as a concern in frozen foods is one that's termed Listeria monocytogenes. Next slide, please. This slide describes Listeria monocytogenes, but as clarification, I want to clear up any confusion between the use of the terms Listeria and the pathogenic member of this genus, Listeria monocytogenes. Indeed, Listeria species is used as an indicator of Listeria monocytogenes in facilities that produce foods, and we can talk about this at a later time. But listeriosis is the disease condition resulting from the consumption of food contaminated with the pathogenic species L. mono, or Listeria monocytogenes, or LM for short. Symptoms range from mild diarrhea and fever to a general weakness to a more invasive and debilitating form of listeriosis. In the US, estimates range from 1,600 illnesses to 260 deaths annually. The most staggering statistic, of course, associated with Listeria mono is the high mortality rate with listeriosis, upwards of 15 to 20%, particularly among individuals that have a weakened immune response and vulnerable subpopulations that include pregnant women, elderly, the infants, and patients undergoing cancer treatments or dialysis. Next slide, please. As we compare the pathogen Listeria monocytogenes with other pathogens, it becomes clear that LM has some unique features. And one is that it is a high-dose pathogen, requiring several-fold higher numbers of cells consumed by an individual to cause illness. Listeria mono, you require about 10 billion cells versus less than 10,000 cells for Salmonella. I mentioned earlier, LM is also typified by a high mortality rate, particularly among those vulnerable populations. So I'd really like you all to think about these subpopulations as a target audience for communicating the risks associated with Listeria mono in their diets. And we should also recognize that today there is a growing demographic of these vulnerable subpopulations in the United States. Next slide, please. The fact is, Listeria and Listeria mono are somewhat naturally occurring and may readily find entry into food processing facilities where damp and cool environments, the pathogen begins to find harborage and grow and ultimately find its way to surfaces of equipment that come in contact with food. And one way that processors can and should address persistence of these pathogens in processing environments is by the application of robust environmental sampling and testing programs to identify these growth harborage sites and eliminate them. Next slide, please. It's easy to see that while Listeria mono can become prevalent in the food supply, understanding the risk profile of foods is equally relevant to any discussion surrounding protecting consumers from Listeria mono. I talked about vulnerable populations, but looking at it from the perspective of varied foods in general, Listeria mono is of significant concern in what we call ready-to-eat foods, and within it, the category of ready-to-eat foods that support growth during storage or during shelf life prior to consumption. Why? Because the reason is the nature of Listeria mono and its infectious dose and the dose response that I just described. Growth means that potential to have high levels of pathogen in foods. In fact, regulatory policies are focused on ready-to-eat foods that support growth, and these are the high-risk foods. And you'll see in a later slide that it's foods like deli meats and soft cheeses, even some produce items, have the greatest burden of listeriosis incidence in the United States. Frozen foods, on the other hand, which do not support growth during their shelf life in the freezer, as an example, are low-risk foods, although there is concern. Frozen vegetables have been implicated in sporadic outbreaks. It's also important to recognize L. mono is readily inactivated by cooking, heating, or other thermal treatments. And it's precisely for this reason only ready-to-eat foods fall within the purview of LM risk, and it is presumed that with these foods, there is no kill step prior to consumption. Many ready-to-eat foods are refrigerated, temperatures at which Listeria mono can grow well, and these foods may have just enough shelf life, such as deli meats, to support growth to those high numbers that can cause infection. If it's not already clear, this will become a common theme: growth and high numbers of L. mono. On the flip side, the scientific community recognizes that Listeria mono is pretty prevalent in our food supply. at low levels. In fact, Canada's publicly available document, Health Canada's LM Prevention and Control document, explicitly states that Canadians likely consume low levels of LM in their food supply. And this fact is unlikely to be any different in the American scenario. Next slide, please. So what results in foodborne listeriosis? Where should we focus our control efforts? There's LM in the food supply. We have to prevent it from growing it. They're high-risk foods. We've got to prevent them from growing to high numbers. And so in some sense, I believe we're blessed. We're blessed to have to deal with a high-dose pathogen. And so we can focus on those high-risk foods. For other foods, we need to preclude the potential for growth. For example, thawing frozen vegetables at room temperature or in the refrigerator for extended periods of time prior to cooking and consumption are not following validated cooking instructions. The other opportunity is to really focus on vulnerable populations and educating their consumption patterns and behaviors. Next slide, please. So let me quickly run through. Can we get to the next slide, please, Katie? Yeah, the previous slide, please. Thank you. Thank you. Let me quickly run through two notable outbreaks in the past decade or so that illuminate this point. The Bluebell ice cream outbreak, which probably you're all quite privy to if you've been in the field in the last decade. The 10 illnesses included consumers in the vulnerable category with an average age in the 70s and patients who were already hospitalized. They consumed milkshakes made with contaminated ice cream, presenting a modified growth environment for Listeria mono to grow to high levels. A lot more ice cream was consumed by the common American public, but of those 23 million servings of contaminated product consumed, there were no illnesses other than those that were identified in these hospitals. Next slide. In the caramel apple outbreak, also there was a growth event. Remember, neither the apples themselves, due to their acidity, nor the caramel, due to their low water activity, were supportive of growth of Listeria mono. But inserting the stick into a caramel apple created a growth dynamic with increased water activity, access to sugars, leading to high levels of the pathogen. Again, 11 of the cases were vulnerable pregnant women. Next slide, please. And this is just a slide of notable listeriosis outbreaks in the United States. All of these are ready-to-eat foods. In the green are ready-to-eat foods that do not support growth, those sporadic outbreaks, including some frozen items. And so the question is, what were the conditions that led to high levels of pathogen that resulted prior to consumption? Next slide, please. In response to these outbreaks, the agency, the Food and Drug Administration and FSIS, and industry has responded by recalling any finding of Listeria mono. And from the standpoint of microbial contaminants, you'll see from this slide that Listeria recalls are the #1 microbial contaminant that results in a recall. Next slide, please. See the list of LM-related product recalls. Note how many are the products that do not support growth. These are all recalled. None of these led to illnesses or outbreaks. You've got pumpkin seeds, frozen biscuit dough, and a number of frozen products that were all recalled because we act on the presence of finding an LM. And you would think that this would have some impact on listeriosis incidence in the United States. Next slide, please. But I would argue that despite these efforts, CDC's Healthy People 2030 document shows that we in the US have not been making progress. Incidence is in fact rising, and we at AFFI believe this is an immense policy opportunity. We may not eliminate LM from our food supply like the rest of the globe, but we can strive to eliminate LM from our food processing environments, and that remains AFFI members' overarching priority. Since the discussion here today is not about policy, I'm happy to take further dialogue or questions and discussions after this webinar, but that is an area that AFFI is a strong advocate. Next slide, please. So what does it mean to maximize the protective effects and taking a risk-based approach? It means a more risk-based regulatory framework. It means an industry commitment to environmental sampling, and it also means addressing consumer education, which is the reason why I included this slide in this deck. And that consumer education is addressed particularly across vulnerable communities. Next slide, please. So let's talk through a few examples. Share the facts and dispel some misperceptions about frozen. Let's talk about frozen produce, which includes frozen fruits and vegetables. The processes are quite simple, although there is a key difference between frozen fruits and frozen vegetables. In frozen vegetables, the process entails a blanching step during their processing, while frozen fruit are typically simply washed and frozen prior to packaging. And next slide, please. And that distinction makes frozen foods truly ready-to-eat foods, and which do not need any further intervention prior to consumption, while frozen vegetables bear validated cooking instructions to prepare them prior to consumption. So you can see where the breakdown might occur at the consumer level, whether during storage, whether it's thawing after you take them out of the freezer, or even while following cooking instructions or the lack thereof. So the answer to the question at the top of this slide, are frozen foods RTE, is it depends. And it's really important to understand the differences between frozen vegetables and frozen fruits. Next slide, please. Here's an example of validated cooking instructions on the back of a frozen vegetable medley package. Note a couple of caveats on the right image at the bottom. Before eating, cook thoroughly to at least 160 Fahrenheit. Keep frozen until ready to cook. Refrigerate leftovers after cooking. While thermometers in US households are not entirely common, or even if they're present, their use is not highly prevalent, the instructions also provide wattage information and specific instructions before and after microwaving to follow. All of these combined ensure safe consumption. Next slide, please. Here is another example where you have similar instructions and recommendations. And this is a garlic and frozen vegetable medley. Next slide, please. I want to emphasize here that while food safety is vital, access to frozen fruits and vegetables is also critical to the American diet. Know that the data shows that only 1 in 10 Americans consume the recommended amounts of fruits and vegetables. And when you think about frozen produce, it comes peeled and chopped, making it easier for families to add in fruits and vegetables during mealtime. Research also demonstrates they're nutritionally equal, if not better than their fresh counterparts. As I described earlier, fruits and vegetables are frozen within hours of our harvest, and the quick freezing process locks in those nutrients. So we have a lot of catching up to do with that data point, right? Only 1 in 10 Americans consume the recommended daily value of fruits and vegetables. And it's up to us to participate in inclusion of produce in our diets. And frozen fruits and vegetables have an important role, and food safety is, of course, central to that effort. Next slide. One format that has gained traction is the use of frozen ingredients to prepare smoothies. It makes sense, right? The convenience is attractive. And at the same time, it's important to communicate the differences that I mentioned earlier. You'll see here that there are 3 groups of products: ready to eat, not ready to eat, and another ready to eat. On the left side are frozen fruit. While all of these together, by the way, are low risk, which means they do not support growth by virtue of being frozen. Remember, frozen fruits are ready to eat. There are no cooking instructions. They can be directly used in a smoothie. Frozen greens or other vegetables are not ready to eat. They have validated cooking instructions, which should be applied if they were to be added to a smoothie blend. On the other hand, you see on the right side, there are some blends of frozen fruits and vegetables available in the marketplace, and these can be treated as ready to eat because processors have ensured that they do not need further preparation by the consumer. Next slide, please. When we get into the world of multi-component foods, other perceptions come into play. The cordon bleu, a frozen breaded stuffed chicken product, is the poster child, in my view, for misperceptions. This is largely driven by the image that you see here in this slide. It represents a ready-to-eat food, browned, cooked chicken, melted cheese. Do we need to cook this? Unlikely. And that image minimizes many of the other terms and statements on this package about the true nature of this food. Hit the next slide, please. Despite the fact that the term, no, go back to the previous slide. It was the little green circles that I'd like to call attention. Despite the fact that the term raw appears 4 times just on the front label, consumers have been known to simply unpack and consume this product with minimal cooking. These products are not ready to eat, and they have been recalled multiple times, resulting from these misperceptions. Next slide, please. And all frozen, not ready to eat foods, these would be the entrees, the side dishes. These all should have validated cooking instructions in multiple formats. These ensure both high quality and nutrition, but most essentially, safety. Yes, microwave wattage, not accurately following the 5 instructional steps on this back package, thawing after removing the freezer, all of those type of behaviors can undermine safety. So one needs to be quite careful. Next slide, please. And beyond safety, I'd like to switch to the tangible benefits of frozen foods that they have to offer to today's consumers. AFFI continues to identify ways to research, communicate, and share the relevance of frozen to a practical and versatile kitchen and meal preparation. Whether the limited time they need to prep for a meal or the fact that they are so easily portionable and reusable. But importantly, that freezing foods preserves nutrients and helps sustain the nutritional potential of a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, giving us year-round, affordable access. Next slide, please. We conducted a side-by-side comparison of 4 types of the most loved American foods using homemade recipes versus same or similar products in the frozen format. Nutritionally, and that's based on a 100-gram calculation, frozen products were within 5% of the daily value of different nutrients versus their freshly made counterpart. In general, saturated fat and sodium tend to be lower in frozen foods, and protein and calcium tend to be higher in the homemade recipes. Calories, for which there is no daily value on your nutritional label, were lower for frozen foods when compared to homemade foods for all of these categories. Similarly, when looking at meal preparation and cooking time, there are demonstrated significant advantages. The data shows that preparation time for the most popular frozen meals is less than a minute to 3 to 4 minutes, compared to more than 20 minutes for home-prepared counterparts. For most frozen options, the microwave can save even more time, since preheating the oven is not necessary. In fact, microwave fresh meals require 35 minutes less cook time than any of the homemade equivalents that are cooked in a conventional oven. Overall, oven-cooked frozen meals require nearly no preparation and nearly a half-hour less cook time compared to their homemade equivalents. Lastly, the per-serving cost calculation. Give me 1 second. Sorry for the interruption. Lastly, the per-serving cost calculation shows that savings don't end with time. They extend to the wallet. In fact, the average cost per saving for meals is $2.50 less than their homemade equivalents. This means a $10 saving per meal for a family of 4. And that's not all. Not only does a frozen meal cost less than the ingredients to prepare a comparable recipe at home, frozen foods also have a longer shelf life and therefore help reduce food waste. One separate study published in the Nutritional Journal finds that the average American consumer spends roughly $1,300 per year on food that's wasted. Spoilage, buying more than what's needed, expired dates, and over or under ripened produce top the list of reasons why consumers say they wasted food. Next slide, please. And the benefits of longer shelf life are clear. Frozen foods have a really important role in reducing food waste. I hope this audience can take away some of the what I have to share here on this in this presentation. Next slide, please. And this becomes all the more relevant as we know. Can you hit the next couple of buttons, please? Yep, thank you. And this is all the more relevant as we know food waste at the consumer level is a significant challenge. The data is clear, and we have an opportunity to address this issue with frozen foods. Nearly half of household food goes to landfill in the United States. That equates to about 200 pounds of food per year, and as I mentioned, close to $1,500 of food costs for a family of 4 per year. Next slide, please. Precisely because there are financial costs to consumers, but also broader environmental costs. All of this food waste goes to landfill, and that's where methane, one of the greenhouse gas emissions, gets exacerbated. Next slide, please. Some of the initial research shows that frozen foods can lead the way. A 2023 Cornell University meta-analysis assessed the rate of frozen food waste at retail and consumer levels. In fact, not only at the consumer level, but also, one more enter, please, but also at the retail level. In comparison to fresh, frozen foods are wasted much lower levels. The ratio of fresh to frozen food waste you see here is 10.3, and of vegetables is 3.9. At the retail level too, you see almost a doubling to tenfold times increase in fresh food versus frozen food waste. Next slide, please. And we also know what the main reasons of consumer food waste are. When you're talking about fresh, it's product no longer edible, too much was prepared, the product was forgotten, didn't look right, etc. And frozen, typically because you see an expired date. And we can talk might have a separate webinar on expiration dates and frozen foods and quality and safety implications. But product is also forgotten in the freezer. Next slide, please. A consumer survey conducted by AFFI of over 1,500 people revealed frozen is already viewed positively in terms of food waste reduction alongside a slew of other benefits. You'll see here on this slide that 79% reported their number one reason for discarding fresh is because it spoils. On the other hand, 73% report turning to frozen food to reduce food waste. And I will leave this slide deck with Katie for further sharing. So you have a few more data points here for you to evaluate. Next slide, please. A recent study by Ohio State across U.S. households and their food waste behavior showed 55% of consumers buy frozen foods to reduce food waste. The study with U.S. household waste shows about 26 grams per person per week of food that was once frozen is wasted, which is about 6% of all household food waste. This finding indicates that a very small portion of food waste in U.S. household come from frozen foods. Vegetables and meats are the most commonly discarded among frozen, and among the frozen items reported, about 30% were purchased as frozen rather than purchased as fresh and then frozen at a later time by the consumer. And then about 30% more were reported as discarded straight from the refrigerator rather than directly from the freezer. These findings are important for informing strategies for us to reduce household food waste. Overall, though, we believe consumer education about freezers can go a long way in helping prevent food waste. Next slide, please. In summary, the data points to frozen as a solution. Food waste matters to consumers and your audiences. Buying and consuming frozen foods helps reduce food waste. The frozen aisle offers a variety of options for every diet, and frozen foods make nutritious eating quite simple and easy. And I'll share this next slide with you as a digression. Next slide, please. A bit here to talk about one of the banes of frozen food storage, and that is freezer burn. Frozen foods are exposed to air even inside the freezer, and they can be damaged because there's oxidation and dehydration. And it's important to recognize that while food with freezer burn looks unappetizing, it is still safe to eat. And while palatability might suffer, it's rather than throwing away the food, you could remove the burned portion, if you will, and then proceed with your normal preparation. And there are ways to prevent freezer burn. You could avoid it by tightly sealing or vacuum wrapping foods before they're placed into the freezing, or creating some kind of an airtight seals. There's a great article on freezer burn that was published in the Washington Post in the early part of last year that I would allude you to. So with that, I think, Katie, if I may go to this slide, I want to maybe bring your attention to some of the tools. We have a number of tools that AFFI has put together in terms of collateral resources available on the websites that I have highlighted here on this slide. And I invite your participation in AFFI's Food Safety Consortium, which is October 19th through the 22nd. Please reach out to us. We have, obviously, there's being in DC, it's a great place to have see a little bit of an intersection of science and policy, but a lot of industry and industry best practices. And we'd love to see some of your educator community at this conference as well. So, Katie, thank you again. I hope this hit the mark for some better understanding and clarity around the safety, nutrition, and other benefits of frozen foods. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. I'm going to stop sharing here because we have maybe 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A with Dr. Gummalla, and there are already quite a few questions in the Q&A box for you. So let me pull those up. Okay, first question, is there a process other than IQF that would result in product that appears individually frozen? Oh, you muted again, Sanjay.
Yeah, there's lots of different methodologies. I think the standard practice is IQF. It all depends on the type of equipment, the type of product, and the alignment of the product format and the type of process. But individually quick frozen can result in not only at the vegetable and fruit level, but also individually quick frozen in slightly larger sort of ingredients and products. But it's a terminology more than it is, I would say, a specific process. And there are certainly, but it is a technology, right? I mean, it is a type of technology, and it's really rapid freezing. And that's opposed to sort of bulk freezing processes, which you might practice that even in your freezer, right? You package something up and you let it sit in your freezer, then that's also freezing. Certainly not rapid, and it's certainly not going to keep those individual pieces and the integrity of those pieces.
You mentioned listeria likely isn't affected by heat treatment. Why is it recommended that vulnerable populations like pregnant women heat their lunch meat? It's a little off topic from frozen food, but.
Could you repeat that question, please?
Sure. Yeah, it's a question about listeria, and we can always come back to this if you don't have an answer. You mentioned listeria likely isn't affected by heat treatment. Why is it recommended that vulnerable populations like pregnant women heat their lunch meat?
Yeah, no. I mentioned that heat is a very relevant. I certainly don't want to send the wrong message here. Listeria mono is inactivated by heat at the right temperature for the right period of time. So time and temperature have a significant beneficial impact on eliminating any contaminant. And I believe that's probably one of the reasons why we would recommend any food that has the ability to to progress listeria as a contaminant is likely better if it's heat treated. Now, how good a deli meat or a soft cheese is if it's heat treated is a different question, right? That's a quality and appreciation question. But yes, deli meats are stored in the refrigerator. And while some of them are salted and certainly have a lot of preservatives, there are the FSIS recommends a number of ways that processors can limit the growth of Listeria mono. But yeah, absolutely use heat wherever possible to the extent. Now, can you take frozen fruit and boil it? Now that kind of destroys the whole purpose of getting to frozen fruit. So.
Why is it that frozen package directions say keep frozen until ready to use? Is this due to avoiding growth of microbes?
Exactly. I'm so glad that you also gave the answer in that question. And that tells me that I've conveyed the right message. Absolutely. Any opportunity at a temperature over the frozen temperature. Look, we know that there's some outbreak strains of Listeria mono in vegetables that have a higher growth rate than other Listeria mono strains. And so any temperature exposure above frozen, even in the refrigerator, even at 4 degrees Celsius, might be problematic. So if you want to be clear, if you want to steer clear of that growth potential, then it is best to take it right out of the freezer and put it in the microwave. You know, we struggle with this quite a bit at some of the salad bars, right? That might be bringing in frozen vegetables and thawing vegetables out on the salad bar. It's an important question to ask at the salad bar. What is the source of these vegetables? Corn is one example.
Speaking of salads, there's a question about leafy greens here. Why aren't frozen leafy greens safe to eat or ready to eat if they were safe if they were fresh?
Oh, that is a very, very difficult question to answer because we are in a food system that accepts certain levels of risk. This is not a zero risk world. I would say that if you are dealing with a frozen leafy green product, it is absolutely important for you to follow those cooking instructions. And if you are purchasing fresh greens, it's absolutely important to wash them. I mean, there are obviously triple washed versions of certain greens that are available that you could have confidence that these are ready to eat, truly ready to eat. But if you're dealing with a frozen leafy green product, I would strongly recommend that following cooking instructions is an immediate step. And that's the reason why I had that slide on the smoothies, right? These leafy greens are a very important sometimes ingredient for smoothies in consumers' homes. And some of that gets lost because unless it's a truly ready to eat leafy green, you're going to have to follow those cooking instructions even before you put it into the smoothie. But it's been a really difficult dialogue. It's been a very difficult dialogue. And I look to this community to help us manage that conversation.
By microwaving a frozen food, do consumers reduce greenhouse gases by not using a gas stove or oven?
I am dabbling in the world of sustainability and decarbonization. I don't know if I'm the expert on that. I have to presume that depending on what the source of electricity is in your house, if it's coming from a renewable energy, then using the microwave is just fine, right? It's not gonna lead to GHGs as opposed to some kind of a gas source. But if it's being powered by natural gas, then it's probably equivalent.
Does the blanching process lower the risk of L mono for frozen veggies?
Yeah, it does immensely. We've done studies to show that the incoming raw materials at these facilities are laden with high levels of Listeria mono, and that reduction indeed occurs. Most of the process validation that frozen vegetable processors undertake are based on ensuring a significant log reduction, more than 5 to 6 log reduction, in that level. The problem remains, though, with some sporadic contamination that occurs after that lethal step. And that's because you're dealing with an open environment, you're dealing with a facility that's got a lot of moisture, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with, and that's the point I was trying to make. We can't eliminate LM from food entirely, but we can certainly strive towards eliminating LM from our environment, and that's the path that AFFI and our processor members are on. I hope that's a sufficient answer.
Yeah. So there's a couple questions here about resources and studies. One person wants to know if AFFI has flyers or brochures to share with clients and where they would find those on your website.
Yeah, Katie, what I will do is I will have a document shared with you with all of the links to anything that I have referenced, as well as some resources. I would argue that our Frozen Advantage website, which I believe I have on the last slide, is also going to be very helpful. These are all free downloadable resources that are available. I strongly encourage the audience to look at those.
Great. So I'll that document with those resources. We will send that out to you. We will put it on the website with the recording. There'll be lots of places for you to get that. And someone also asked about studies for the comparison of homemade versus frozen meals. If you a link you could relate
that. That's an in-house study. Feel free to give me an email, give my email to the individual who asked that question, and we'll absolutely be happy to share that. And I want to take that question and make an additional comment, which is we at AFFI struggle with some misperceptions around the negativity around frozen, right? We've moved significantly in terms of this, as I mentioned, sophistication and freezing processes, but we've also moved in a positive way. I mean, look, go to Trader Joe's, go to the frozen aisle. Just the quality and diversity of foods is so great. And we struggle with folks still sort of thinking about why these products are, I don't know, second class, if you will. And that is the reason why we are beginning to undertake some of these studies to show the difference in cost, the difference in nutritional profiles. And certainly one idea that we've had was, well, if I made a frozen pizza, if I bought a frozen pizza and compared that to the pizza that I made at home, what would be the differences in ingredient decks, in nutritional profiles, in the time that it takes, et cetera, and all in the narrative to try to drive away some of this negative perception.
Thank you. Lots of great information. And there are so many questions. I think we'll take a few more and then we have some resources to share at the end. Oh, that one just blew away from me. How do we check which chemicals are safe to wash vegetables with? Do we use a certain website or search engine?
Is this from a processor, I presume? Because they would be the ones who would be undertaking any step. It's funny that question gets asked because we just published a document about processed water and and sort of the disinfectants and chemicals that would be used. I will also share that document with you, Katie, if that's helpful to this individual.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. Yes.
Yeah.
This person says, forgive me if you touched on this when reviewing thawing of frozen items, but would you recommend against any kind of thawing under refrigerated temperatures for short periods of time, like less than 2 hours? So I think they're asking if you thawed something outside of the fridge for less than 2 hours, would that be safe?
That's a great question. I always try to think of this as a risk-based decision. The generation time of Listeria mono as a bacterium is about probably 30 or 40 minutes. And so let's say if you had one cell, it becomes 2 cells in 40 minutes, and that becomes 4 cells in the next 40 minutes, et cetera, right? So if you look at it from that perspective, it doesn't seem like a huge risk, right? But if you had 100 cells, then that becomes sort of, 10 to the, it's logarithmic growth, right? So you're beginning to see 10 becomes 10 to the 3, 10 or 10 to the 2 becomes 10 to the 3, and 10 to the 3 becomes 10 to the 4, etc. So you begin to have challenges. That's not to say that all of these frozen vegetables have lots and lots of Listeria mono in produce items. What we're saying is that the best approach is to take it straight from the freezer directly to the cooking step. But I can't imagine that 30, 40 minutes or an hour or 2 hours is going to be excessively, is going to increase risk excessively. Particularly if you follow through with the cooking instructions to the T.
Yeah. Okay, let me pull one more question. If chicken or meat is purchased fresh from the cooler and it's discounted due to, oh wait, let me read this again. If chicken or meat is purchased fresh from the cooler discounted due to the sell-by date approaching, and the purchaser chooses to freeze it, how long would it be good? Does that change things?
Everything starts with the initial load of microorganisms, which is what the message I was trying to talk about earlier. I think freezing is a great way to preserve whatever you've purchased. I presume that if you've purchased it, it is not sort of, I mean, if you're talking about raw chicken, obviously there's going to be microorganisms in it. It hasn't been cooked yet, but freezing it is great. I mean, I think the idea here is you're preventing waste, and then cooking to the right temperature and the right time will eliminate that. Most of these pathogens, whether it's Salmonella, Listeria mono, even O15787, all of these are heat labile, and cooking is an excellent way to get past that barrier.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gummalla, that you answered a lot of questions. I appreciate all the information. Is there anything you want to share in closing before we get to the resources at the end here?
I think the nature of questions and even somewhat my responses speaks to the ambiguity and challenge of this very, very difficult topic. And so the more we talk about it, I think the more we're going to find alignment. And so I encourage that in this community and across with professionals. There's a fantastic podcast that you probably all have participated in the past. It's called Risky or Not Risky, I think. It's done by Don Schaffner and Ben Chapman. And I strongly encourage you to push some of those questions their way as well. I'd love to hear their insights on some of this on some of these questions. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we're just going to take a couple minutes here at the end. Let me bring the slides back up to share some resources on freezing and frozen food safety that you can use in your community outreach. I'll go pretty quickly, but you'll have a copy of the slides with all of the links. So we have a campaign called Go 40 or Below. So this is designed to help you teach why 40 degrees Fahrenheit, below 40, is critical for food safety, but it also reinforces some key freezing messages in the materials, like safe ways to thaw foods and safe food storage. And on each of these slides, I have some ideas for how you can use these research resources. For 40 or below, there's a backfighter activation guide that has several ideas on how to share the messages with your community, so check that out. So many resources in Go 40 or Below. I do want to draw particular attention to the science behind the messages. That's, I think, a 2-page flyer that gives more details on the science behind the recommendations that we're giving. There are also brochures for some of our higher risk populations, like parents and seniors, that are in English and Spanish. There's infographics, PowerPoint, social media tools, tons of things available under 40 or below. Freezer Mythbusters. So part of our Mythbusters series includes myths on the freezer. So you could use these in social media posts or to start classroom discussions. You could print them for display boards. The myths on freezer are safe ways to thaw food and whether freezing kills bacteria or not. And they're, again, available in English and Spanish. take a fresh look at frozen foods. I encourage you to check this out and read it. It's a blog by Dr. Donna Guerin with food safety tips for frozen foods, and it reinforces that following package cooking instructions, the validated instructions that Dr. Gummalla kept talking about. We want to make sure we're following those. So you could be quoting this blog in your newsletters. You could use it as a conversation starter in classes or trainings when you're talking about frozen foods. Chill, of course, is one of the core four, and we have some resources specifically for that step. There's a chill fact sheet that gives tips for thawing food safely and a storage times chart. So we had a lot of questions about how long food is good in the fridge or freezer. That chart has some information on that, and you could post it up in the kitchen, especially if it's a shared kitchen. Don't Wing It, which is a campaign on safe poultry handling. And it has tips for safe thawing of frozen poultry and safe storage of frozen poultry. It also has a science behind the messages and tips for talking about that with consumers. So you can there's like handouts and infographics as part of that. You could use as reinforcements in like cooking classes if you're using chicken. It's a good time to talk about around Thanksgiving when people are thawing turkeys. I want to share also, outside of our resources, a few things you can get from CDC, FDA, and USDA. Food Keeper app is something like I recommend all the time to my friends and family, because if you're in food safety, they ask you questions like, how long can I keep my potatoes, or different things. So I recommend checking that out. It's a database. You can see a picture on the right. So you can search like any item and they'll recommend storage times, how long you can keep those for, fresh or frozen. CDC has some tips on what to do if your freezer goes out during a power outage. How do you handle that situation? FDA, under there, Are You Storing Your Food Safely, has some good tips on food storage basics and freezer facts. And USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service has a whole freezing and food safety page that I recommend you check out. It has like common questions people ask and the answers to those. And then finally, the last thing I want to talk about is World Food Safety Day. That is coming up on June 7th. The theme is food safety, science, and action. So it's the perfect time to talk about this topic and the science behind freezing and frozen food safety. We put together several of our science-based tools and resources on foodsafetyday.org that you can highlight when you're helping communities talk about science and risk and the decisions that they're making. So that is coming up. And then just a couple quick slides and we'll close out. Thank you everyone for being here today. If you have any questions or thoughts, you're always welcome to contact me. That's my email address there. Make sure you're following the partnership on Facebook, LinkedIn. Make sure you're on our newsletter. If you go to fightback.org/get involved, you can find more ways to get involved. And I do want to say a really huge thank you to our partners and community connectors. They are who make things like this webinar and all of the free resources that we're able to share with you totally possible. Without them, we'd have to charge you for these. So a huge thank you to all of our partners. We have over 40 partners here. They're also listed on the website if you ever want to check that out. And your final reminder, I know lots of you want to know how to get your CEUs. It sounded like there was trouble downloading them from the chat box. The CEUs, the recording, slides, the resources Sanjay will share with us, we will send those to you in an email likely tomorrow. And then we will post them on fightback.org under free resources and then recorded webinars. And if you're seeking in CHEC, just make a note that you do need to complete that online questionnaire by July 11th. That's it, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks again, Dr. Gummalla. We appreciate it. Bye, everyone.